Thanks for tuning in to TellyCast. Before you listen to the show, I wanted to let you know about our next event, the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios. It's the only event in the UK exploring the opportunities, trends and commerce in digital-first video. It's happening on Thursday, November the 9th at London's BFI South Bank and features keynote addresses from TikTok, Snap and Banijay. Network with creators and industry leaders and experience panel sessions on funding, branded content, formats, the crossover between TV and social first video, and more. For tickets and more information, visit tellycast.com/events. But hurry, last year's event sold out, so secure yours now. The TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios. We'll see you there.
TellyCast.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to another TellyCast. My guest on this week's show is UK-based indie producer Mike Benson, who's managed that rarest of things in TV to find success in both unscripted and drama production. And not only that, he's achieved that despite coming from outside the London bubble. We're chatting about Mike's career journey, how he's built his business, the current state of the TV market, and of course, we get to find out his hero of the week and who or what he's telling to get in the bin. It's coming right up on this week's TellyCast. My guest on this week's TellyCast is boss of indie production companies Chalkboard TV and Clapperboard, Mike Benson. Mike, welcome to TellyCast.
Thank you, Justin. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have a fellow Northern England guest on the show. Mike, tell us, where in the world are you joining us from now and where'd you come from?
I'm based down in Wimbledon, so I live in Wimbledon. The office is up in Olympia, but I'm originally from a rival northern city of Bradford. I know you're from Leeds, Justin. So, I've been down here a good few years. So, I think Wimbledon feels a bit different to Bradford, but I go up north and I get accused of being posh, and down here I get accused of being so northern, so I can't win, really.
It is great to have a fellow northerner and somebody who's been so successful in the TV industry. We'll maybe come and talk a little bit about that, because we were both recently at the Edinburgh TV Festival, and that's one of the sort of key talking points of that event. It's always about, diversity and inclusion and, opportunity for lots of different people in the TV industry. It never seems to get any better, to be honest. There's lots of talk every year about it, but it's always great to see people from Northern England who've been successful. And so tell us actually about your career so far then. How did you get involved in TV in the first place? What was your first role? What was your first break into TV?
Yeah, so I didn't actually start out working in TV, which I always think is kind of healthy because it gives you a bit of perspective and appreciation on working in TV. I went to uni after school, and when I left uni, I worked for Procter & Gamble. So I did one of these kind of faceless grad schemes that you can do, and I spent a couple of years selling Max Factor makeup and Pantene and nappies, and I kind of wanted to do something more creative. I'd done kind of a creative degree, and so I kind of quit after a couple of years, and I was looking at maybe going into journalism, and then I was lucky enough to get a break at RDF on their internship scheme. At that time, RDF were one of the few places that did internships, and internships that gave you a guaranteed junior researcher credit at the end of it. And it was a fantastic place to be, RDF at that time. They were making a hell of a lot of shows. It was, really good people, Matthew and David Frank and Jules Waring. And so that got me into TV. I was essentially kind of an intern runner. And then I just worked on a number of different productions. I was lucky enough to go on Shipwrecked, which when I got on that, I was like, TV's amazing. It was quite early. That was a fantastic experience. So I started at RDF, but I always had the one eye to get into kind of development. My career at the start, I came up through development. I got a job at BBC Worldwide under Wayne Garvey and Ben Hall. And that was one of the best things that I did, because you kind of suddenly parted to the international marketplace and the format marketplace and how things are financed and come to fruition. So even though I was junior, I was a researcher. I kind of got to travel and learn how the TV business worked aside from the UK. So yeah, I was at Worldwide for a few years, and then I went to BBC. I was an exec at BBC Studios for a while, and then I got a job at Shine. So I went to Shine TV and then worked at Shine Group for a few years, which obviously Liz was heading up, and Alex from Channel 4. And again, it was a fantastic place to be at that time, Shine. It wasn't too huge. There were maybe 12 or 13 companies, but it was just a really impressive business. And it was quite interesting coming from somewhere like P&G, who are all about brands and brand management, and that was something that Shine did fantastically at that time. I've never seen it done better, to be honest. The way that they managed the rollout of MasterChef and Biggest Loser. It was an impressive operation and really, really nice people. So, yeah. And again, I was working on more the international side of things. I was a development exec for Shine Group, and that was just really, really interesting as well. So yeah, that took me up to when we started Chalkboard around 10 years ago.
That's a really good list of companies to have experience on. Shine, BBC Worldwide, BBC Studios, and RDF. That's a pretty good ground to learn your craft and learn your trade. When you started at RDF, Mike, did you, as an intern, presumably that was down in London, it must have been pretty tough living, right? Because moving down to London and working as an intern, fantastic opportunity, obviously, but London's an expensive place to live.
It was. I stayed on my mate's couch for the first kind of few months, and then actually I was lucky enough to go away to do Shipwreck for a good few months. And when I came back, I had just about enough money to get a room and rent a room, but it was difficult. And obviously it's something that's talked about a lot in the industry about paying interns and, but I think that was the era where a lot of interns didn't get paid. But I was lucky enough to be paid, and kind of hats off to RDF for that. So I was kind of lucky, but I'm sure at that same time there were interns all across the industry who weren't getting paid. And certainly if you don't live in the vicinity of London, it's difficult to get a start. And you'll know, coming from Leeds, and obviously things are changing now. Channel 4 moving up to Leeds as nations and regions is properly supported. But, when I was growing up, I didn't have a clue how to start in TV. I didn't even know where you begin, and so it was only, I was lucky I had a friend that had already got into TV who told me about the ropes, but other than that, I wouldn't have had a clue where to begin. So I was lucky with RDF because they paid me. So that gave me a foothold to kind of try and progress from there.
Right. Okay. So when you left Shine, was that with a vision to start your own production company? Tell us about the transition from working at Shine to starting your own business.
I don't know. I think it was one of my old bosses, a guy called Ben Hall, who's a really good guy. We actually started Chalkboard with him. He moved on subsequently, but when he was my boss actually at BBC Worldwide, and he was always, why don't you do this? He would always kind of lay out ambitions that you never thought you could achieve. He was that kind of guy. And I think he said to me, why don't you start your own indie? And it never occurred to me. I was like, how could I start my own indie? Do people even do that? I knew I could develop and pitch and produce. The business side of it, I was pretty green. But I think, the thing about running indie, you have to start with the ideas, being able to pitch and develop. And so, yeah, but for a long time, I got a lot of no's in terms of trying to get the funding for the business. And then eventually, after a lot of no's and me nearly giving up on it, I got a yes, and kind of learned on the job. When you first start, you just like, imagine if we got a commission, and then you get a commission, it's amazing. Then imagine if we get a few commissions or a returning series. So it's always jumping to the next step. But I was really green when I started, especially on the running a business side of it. And I've kind of learned as I go, but you're still kind of learning, especially when we moved from non-scripted to scripted. That was a different beast. But it was Ben saying to me, why don't you go for starting your own indie? And I kind of went from there and learned on the job.
Following your initial investment that you got to start the business, then how long was it between then and you getting your first green light?
After 6 months to 12 months, we did a show for Sky called My Wonderful Life, which was a really, really powerful show. It was about people with life-limiting illnesses who were leaving messages and gifts and surprises for people to be passed on after they passed away. It's based on a website that exists that does exactly that. And, as first shows go, it was a pretty complicated and sensitive show to make. And it actually took us 4 years to make it. So it was a long one. I think, when you start in an indie, you want to have ambitious ideas, and the UK is a pretty well-fed market, so you have to have ambition in what you're pitching. And so we pitched in that, and lucky enough for Sky to say yes, and then we made it. So that was the first commission, and it kind of set a template for what we wanted with Chalkboard. We've done a lot of kind of probably sensitive access documentaries, or we like to think ideas that are coming at subject matters from a different perspective. But, there's so many indies in the UK, you've got to have an idea that waves its hand in the air. And, once in a blue moon, we'll have one that seems to do that. And that kind of set a template with what we tried to do with Chalkboard.
There was a time pre-COVID, I think, you would read, new production companies starting up, particularly by former commissioners, setting up just about every week. And it was like, well, how many production companies can the TV industry in the UK actually support? It seemed to be literally thousands of them. What's your approach then to development and developing those great ideas? And we'll come to talk about Clapperboard, which is your scripted business, in a second. But having known and represented lots of factual producers in the UK, they all seem to have amazing ideas. So, how do you cut through?
There's a few things that I think are currency, in terms of getting commission. Obviously, having a different idea or a different approach is one. Obviously, talent is a big thing at the minute, and we'll talk about talent, I think, a little bit later as well. Things like access can be real currency. We did a show called Inside Prison, the Visiting Hour, and it was a fantastic prison show. It was kind of, we rigged a prison visit room with cameras and told the story of prisoners through people who they loved, who came to see them. It wasn't necessarily about their crime. It was about their relationships. And that was, I think, a good example where we went to the commissioner with the access, but also with what was hopefully a slightly different angle into it. It ended up looking like first dates in a prison visit room is kind of the kind of vibe of the show. So I think things like trying to devise access that gets you on the radar and then trying to find an angle into it. It's not easy. So many subject matters have been explored. I tried to employ and work with people who kind of think differently and have quite outlandish ideas. Our first big commission, but it was a big event for us. We got a game show called Don't Ask Me, Ask Britain, commissioned for ITV. It was kind of a game show where a team of celebrities have to second guess the nation. And so you might ask the nation, who's the sexiest James Bond of all time? Is it Roger Moore? Is it Sean Connery? Is it Daniel Craig? The celebrities second guess who they think the nation's gone for, and then win percentage points equal to that percentage of the nation that have gone for it. And we got into a meeting with Kevin Ligo to pitch it. We've gone through the change, and essentially before the meeting, we got 200 of our friends and family live so that Kevin could play it with them. And it really kind of brought the idea to life for him. So we would ask questions to the 200 people live, and Kevin would have to second guess what they'd gone for. But I always remember, and I genuinely think this is why he commissioned it, the final question was, should Kevin commission this groundbreaking, unique show? And 95% of our friends and family said yes, and 5% said no. I think Kevin thought it was hilarious that at this crucial juncture in our career and company, 5% of our friends chose to say no, but I think it was a good example of, trying to bring the idea to life and try to do something different in pitches as well. I think commissioners get pitched, 3-4 times a day. And I think you have to put the energy into how you're pitching it as well as the idea. So often we would try to bring the idea to life in unique ways. And that seemed to work quite well for us, for Chalkboard.
Don't Ask Me was presumably also, I'm on your website and I'm looking at this, it's a format now. There's Don't Ask Me Middle East and Don't Ask Me Italy. So you obviously got that commissioned and then that travelled as a format.
Well, it was actually more reverse. We got it commissioned abroad before we got it commissioned here. So I think we made it in Spain, in the Middle East, in Italy. It was quite interesting. We traveled to the Middle East to make it, to Beirut, and it was a pretty unique experience. There was quite a lot of unrest when we were filming there. There were kind of tanks outside the studio, but it was, it was a fascinating kind of experience making it over there. So yeah, that format traveled a little bit. Unfortunately, it didn't return, which, you always want your shows to return, but it didn't quite knock it out of the park with ITV. So unfortunately, it didn't come back. But, for us as a company, it was good. It was our first kind of big entertainment thing. And that was the other thing that we wanted to focus on, was being being multi-genre, and that's kind of served as well. I think when we were starting, a lot of people said you need to specialize in one genre and be known for that genre. But if we'd have done that, we'd have been out of business within 2 or 3 years. We always kind of felt like we wanted to be multi-genre, and touch wood, it's kind of worked. We've obviously done docs, format, daytime, game shows, and now obviously moving on to scripted as well. So I think, you have to be adaptable in TV. And also TV is an industry of freelancers. So even if you haven't done that genre, you don't have that expertise, you hire in fantastic freelancers who do. I think the moving between genres is something that's really worked for us. Maybe not for every company, but for us it has.
That's really interesting, because you're right. You would imagine as a new business, you'd want to get known for producing a certain type of program, I guess. Certainly in the first few years, to get a niche, to get a specialism, so people can come to you and you've got a tried and tested track record, if you like. But that was right from the beginning. You wanted to go multi-genre, so actually, it was about the quality of the idea, essentially, as opposed to actually just focusing on one particular sector.
If you can get a commission in that genre by hook or by crook, and you do a decent job on the series, you're in that genre. You've got the relationship with the commissioner. There's no reason why you can't keep feeding that and hire people in to kind of underpin that. So, more than anything, we wanted to be known for a company that had different types of ideas and could deliver on them, and would kill ourselves to make them as good as they can be. And I think that's, that's worked for us. As I say, I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but certainly that worked for us.
When did you launch Chalkboard then? What year?
10 years this year. 10 years. So we're having a little party in October, I think. So 10 years that we launched it.
Oh, congratulations. And you've obviously gone, as you said, multi-genre, but you've made the move into scripted, which is, a big leap. And there's a lot of factual businesses out there, particularly in the year or so running up to COVID, when there were, and through COVID, obviously there was a scripted boom, and everybody wanted to get involved in it, and seemed to be a gold rush. How did you make that leap then? Once you'd obviously started to work across genres with Chalkboard, what was the journey to creating a scripted business?
We were very lucky with the timing, to be honest. I mean, Channel 5 very publicly said we want to get back into scripted, and they did a session down in Covent Garden, and they said, look, we want to start funding scripted projects. We don't care whether you've never made a drama or you've made dozens of them. The quid pro quo is this will be the license fee, and we want you to try and make it work with that. And we were at that session. We thought, why not go for it? We were lucky, and then we pitched them a concept called Cold Call, which had come from a couple of fantastic Scottish writers called Karen and Mark Buckland. And they said, we love the title, we love the area, but we wanted to, at that time it was about a cold call business. They wanted to feel more domestic, more Dr. Foster is what they said, albeit on slightly lower budget than Dr. Foster. But they seemed genuinely interested. And so we went away, did some creative work on it, and then came back to them, and they commissioned it. We didn't have a script at that point. We didn't have a director. They commissioned it from concept. And so in many ways, it wasn't that different to a non-scripted pitch. You're working on a treatment. I'll always be appreciative to Channel 5 and Paramount for it. I don't think at that stage any other broadcaster in the UK certainly would have looked at a non-scripted company and said, let's give them a primetime drama. But Channel 5 did. They were good to their word. We'd never made a primetime drama, and they gave us the commission. And I think if you come from a non-scripted background as well, the budget we were looking at, which perhaps another drama company would have gone, there's no way you can make it for that. We were like, absolutely, we'll do something for that, and so we kind of learned on the job. Yeah, so I mean that is basically how it came about. We got to know Seb Cardwell through it. We got to know Ben through it, and we learned on the job. We met with a lot of kind of line producers who were like, "There's no way you can make it for that," But we kind of didn't know any better, so we were like, "Well, we're going to try." We got a fantastic director on it who's from a low budget indie film world, a guy called Gareth Tunley, who'd made a low budget indie feature called The Ghoul for like $100,000, and it'd been nominated for a BAFTA. So we knew it could work with tight budgets, and We had Sally Lindsay on it, who was fantastic and was so invested in it. And I think if that had sunk without a trace, we probably wouldn't be in drama anymore. But because it did well, it kind of opened up a world of opportunities. So, we were hungry for it. I think if you're going to make budget at that kind of tariff, you have to be really hungry for it and really want to do it. But certainly it was the timing that was key. It was Channel 5 being open to commission from different types of companies.
And obviously you'd built up a relationship with them through your non-scripted work. So there was a trust, essentially. That's probably one of the things that got it over the line.
Yeah, I think so. We hadn't made a show for Channel 5 before that, though. So I don't even know if that came into it. I don't even know how aware they were of our non-scripted. I mean, the first time I saw Ben Frau, it was probably 10 years ago, probably the first year of Chalkboard. And we'd done all this development work and, sizzles and treatments. And we got in there and I tried to do my big pitch. And I think he ended the meeting banging his head on the table saying, "Why have you done all this development work? Just pitch me the top line, pitch me the idea, and I'll make a decision." I think after that meeting, it went pretty badly. I was like, they're never going to commission us for anything. And, lucky enough, we had another opportunity. But I think that kind of speaks to how they do business. They're very instinctive. They don't really treat scripted any different to non-scripted in terms of they'll commission quickly. They'll want it turned around quickly. They want to build momentum quickly. So we were just lucky to be in the right place at the right time with a concept that seemed to work for them.
Explain to me, so Clapperboard is your scripted business, but there's some projects that were still under the Chalkboard banner. Explain that a little bit to me and how and when you established Clapperboard as a distinct business.
Yeah, so we did cold call through Chalkboard and then we launched Clapperboard because I think we wanted a different company branded to and known for scripted. Obviously, there's different investment needs with scripted. It's just a slightly different model. So I think we launched Clapperboard, I think it was 2020. So I think it was only kind of 3 years ago. And then we started producing nearly all of our scripted content through Clapperboard. We did do the Vardy versus Rooney Channel 4 drama through Chalkboard, but that was kind of commissioned through non-scripted with our Chalkboard team. So it's slightly confusing. There is a bit of a grey area, but generally Clapperboard does all the scripted, Chalkboard is non-scripted.
How do you approach distribution then? Because obviously you've had a certain amount of international success with some of your formats, and you've obviously worked within huge distribution businesses and seen how distribution works in terms of international sales before. What's your approach certainly when it comes to Chalkboard, first and foremost, about making shows and working with distribution companies?
Yeah, it's been interesting, the difference with Chalkboard to Clapperboard in terms of the approach. I mean, when we launched Chalkboard, we did a big first look deal. So we kind of mortgaged ourselves a little bit with a fantastic distributor, but it meant that it was always with one distributor. And then what happened with Chalkboard is increasingly we were asked for distribution MGs for non-scripted. And so often those wouldn't count on your first look deal. And so that elongated the first look deal. And so I think non-scripted changed just when we started Chalkboard. And increasingly channels were asking distributors to fill the gap. So generally on Chalkboard, we've been with one distributor, but with Clapperboard, we've taken kind of the opposite approach. We've worked with maybe 11 or 12 distributors across our various shows. And that's been really, really positive, actually, because where I've managed to get the budget up a little bit is from higher distribution advances. As the shows have started to sell and Channel 5 content have been recognised internationally, I can eke up a bit more money into the budget, which just gives us a little bit more of a buffer. So the approach to Chalkboard has been completely different to how we've managed it with Clapperboard.
Who's that first look deal with then on Chalkboard?
So Chalkboard is Sky Studios, who are now kind of affiliated, obviously, to NBC. And then on Clapperboard, it's been everyone from, ITV, BBC Studios, E1, Echo, All Free, Night Train, Abacus. We have good relationships across a number of distributors, and it allows for a little bit of competition. I think, Channel 5, there's only so much they can go up on the license fee, I think, which is fair enough. It is what it is. But I think if you can get a little bit more money from distribution, and that was a real kind of slog. So when we launched Cold Call, it was financed by Q Media, who promptly went bust the same week that Cold Call launched. So I think the industry took a look at that and said, well, they've obviously over leveraged themselves. And so Cold Call done really really well. I had the opportunity to make more shows, but I couldn't get a distribution advance from anyone. So I kind of felt the drama journey is over or ends here. And fortunately, we had a couple of distributors who were willing to come in with a much lower distribution advance. And so we decided to just go for it with that and take a much lower margin and try and prove the model. We were making shows by the skin of our teeth. And then fortunately, they rated and started to sell. And then suddenly distributors who weren't interested in us started approaching us and saying, actually, we are interested now in this model. So that's kind of created competition between them that has been good for our budgets and good for us to be able to produce the shows.
What are you producing at the moment, and what can you tell us that you're working on?
On Chalkboard, we've just done a second series of One Question, which is our game show with Claudia Winkleman. The series went out last year, and that's been great for us. It keeps us in that entertainment space, and it took about 10 years to get the commission. So we're really happy that's going again. Doing a couple of documentaries for Channel 5 for Chalkboard as well. And then on the Clapperboard front, so we're just filming the third series, the Madame Blanc Mysteries, which is our co-production with Saffron Cherry, which is Sally Lindsay's company. So that's been a great returner, which you always need as a company. We're just about to launch The Good Ship Murder, which is basically Jane McDonald with murders. It's kind of Death in Paradise set on a cruise ship that we're doing for Channel 5. So that's been a real slog. That's kind of been 2 years of work. It's set on a cruise ship about a retired detective who becomes a cruise ship singer. So it suggests a certain tone. We've got Shane Ward in the lead. And so we filmed that on a cruise ship set in 8 different countries. So we're excited about that. And again, hopefully if that does well, that's a returner. We're doing a couple of Paramount Plus shows. So we did the Ex-Wife last year, which is our first kind of SVOD commission, which was great. And that's led to a couple of shows. One called The Castaways, which is a Lucy Clark adaptation that we're doing with Black Box, who are our co-production partners. And that's with Sheridan Smith. It's a fantastic book. It's kind of a desert island thriller about 2 sisters, and one is on a plane that goes missing, seemingly never to be seen again, and the sisters hunt to try and prove she's alive. You know, it's great. It's got crocodiles and plane crashes and desert islands, and it's a higher budget than we've produced that before, and so that's been really exciting. Then we're doing one called The Serial Killer's Wife, which is kind of another psychological thriller about the wife of a man arrested for a series of murders. That's for Paramount Plus as well. So we've got those, and then we've got another 4-part Channel 5 thriller that we're just in prep on. I think that's it for now.
That's a pretty long list. Congratulations. You must be running around like crazy, Mike.
Yeah, well, I think, when you're producing at a slightly lower tariff, you kind of have to do quite a lot because especially in the current climate, the margins are so squeezed that you really need that volume to be able to do it. So, I think we're trying to reduce. We did a lot of shows the last kind of 2 or 3 years. I think we've done like 14 or 15, which has been great, but you are kind of running around and diluting your team and putting a hell of a lot of pressure. So, hopefully if we keep our low budget thing going, but do it in a slightly higher tier, it'll bode well for the business.
We met at Edinburgh and we chatted about a few things around the industry, which is really the purpose of Edinburgh. Everybody is the opportunity for particularly the UK industry to sort of look inward a little bit and, discuss what's going on. Obviously, the headline is all about the downturn and the current issues facing the industry. You mentioned earlier on about, freelancers and the importance of freelancers to the industry, and with the lack of commissioning, the number of freelancers leaving the industry. What's your take on this? Because obviously you're fairly unique in the sense that you've got a foot in both camps, both scripted and unscripted, and you can see how things are on the scripted side being affected by the actors and the writers' strikes in the US, but also the lack of factual commissioning that's happening for all those different reasons that we've talked about many times before, cost of living crisis, downturn, etc., consolidation. What's your take on it? I mean, it seemingly hasn't really affected your business today. How are you experiencing this downturn as a business?
In non-scripted, I can see, there's a lot of freelancers that we know and love who are fantastic and out of work. It's a common story. Obviously, Broadcast ran an article on it this week, and I do get the impression in non-scripted there's been a real kind of stall on commissions. I think in scripted it's been more about budget, and budget's being squeezed. rather than volume of commissions. But I think in non-scripted, there definitely seems to be less being commissioned. And I think my only personal evidence for that is the sheer number of people who are reapproaching us. Have you got anything? And I really, really feel for them. It's really difficult. And, who knows what the solution is. I mentioned earlier about non-scripted turn into distribution to fill gaps, or co-pros to fill gaps, which obviously has been more commonplace in scripted, for a long, long time. I think that's just going to happen more in non-scripted. I think you're going to have more co-productions. You're going to have distributors kind of being asked to invest more, which was beginning, when we launched Chalkboard. So yeah, it's a really difficult kind of thing. And, but we definitely, feel it, scripted. It's challenging producing at these budget levels. So there's not a huge amount of money to kind of go around, but certainly we've managed to keep producing. But obviously we're kind of at the good end of the scale in terms of scripted, because we've kind of cut our teeth producing lower cost dramas. So, hopefully you might look at us and think, they could still produce it even if it's on a lower tariff, but who knows? We're definitely not immune to the downturn, and the rising cost of production has hit us hugely. Brexit's hit us hugely. So it's still a real slog. And that was interesting about Edinburgh meeting. I love Edinburgh because you see people who share stories. There's not many forums to share stories with other kind of MDs and production companies. And invariably, whatever the genre you're in, whatever stage of company you're in, everyone's feeling the pain. It's really, really difficult. And I think people were really sharing that at Edinburgh, which I thought was a really positive thing to come out of it, because it doesn't happen that much. It tends to be a put your best face on business. But I think that's starting to change. I think people are openly saying, look, I'm struggling here. And I think we share our stories. It's not easy. And when I talk to people, and you were kind enough to say, yeah, things are good, and they are. We're making shows, and that's important as a producer, making shows, but making a margin, protecting a margin, that's a different thing in the current climate.
Well, I can imagine, because that's not really spoken about too much, I don't think, is you mentioned the cost of production. Inflation has been making, shows making their margin even more difficult to achieve when you've got budget pressure as well. I mean, have you found that commissioners and commissioning broadcasters are sensitive to the fact of inflation that is out there? That, and particularly if you're working on a scripted project, which might stretch over 18 months, for example, or let's say a year, we've seen inflation galloping away in a relatively short space of time. I mean, have you seen commissioners being sensitive to that and, helping you out on that side of things?
They do what they can. I mean, all the challenges that indies are facing, obviously the broadcasters are facing as well. So there is that discussion with them. I think they have empathy for it, but also they're facing their own challenges. And what really hit us is when we'd agreed budgets and started producing before the downturn, because then actually what you've agreed at a budget level initially is actually not what it costs, and so.
Well, that's what I mean. Exactly. Yeah. And when it comes to actually delivering it, you're still delivering exactly what you've said with essentially no overspend, but maybe the inflation has actually created an overspend.
Yeah. The challenge we have relationships, we'll have conversations with them about, and they will hear it, and and kind of, but it'll be case by case in terms of overspends. I think you have to really make your case in the current climate, which I kind of understand, because there's not a lot of money kind of flowing around. So, we have taken hits on overspends. And some of that I think is in the control of the producer. I mean, often on first series, you're figuring out how to make the show, and there is always that danger of an overspend. But some of it's definitely related to the cost of production. We've been lucky in one sense because we've had quite a few things going on, so I can mitigate that across our slate. But we're definitely wearing overspends. I'm pretty sure every producer will have a similar story. So I kind of think the channels are doing what they can, but there's only so much they can do. So it's it's a shared pain, and it needs to be a shared solution. And I kind of feel as well, Edinburgh, as I say, I love it. I do feel in some of the sessions that there are things that are said in Edinburgh, at the front of the stage that actually don't matter. It doesn't matter what's said at Edinburgh. It's about what happens in the dark rooms and the Zooms when when you're having the kind of intimate conversations to try and find a way through. The things that are said in Edinburgh need to translate into those rooms, I would say. Because it's when no one's watching that the industry needs to do the right thing, and by producers.
Good to hear you saying that, a lot of producers are sharing war stories, and sharing of the pain a little bit You're right. I think the TV industry has become one of those industries where everybody's putting on that brave face. Oh, yeah, we're fine. And actually, the reality is that many people are not fine, right? And the ability to talk about that and, leads hopefully towards some solutions, or certainly, opens up discussion. And I think it's helpful, isn't it, for MDs to talk and for company leaders to talk and try and work out solutions together.
Yeah, I think so. And if I look back over kind of the last 10 years, and you're always trying to get to that next stage, and you think that next stage will be amazing, all your problems will have gone away, but it doesn't work like that. You're just trying to keep moving forward, but no matter what stage your company at, it's always hard. I did a panel, I think, on Edinburgh last year, and there was, I think it was someone from a new company, and they were saying, we're a new company, we're getting constant rejections, and what should we do about it? And the honest truth was, we are an established company, but the game is rejection. We still get rejected all the time with ideas, with suggestions. TV is a game of rejection, and trying to keep that positivity and enthusiasm and keep moving forward. But especially the last 2 years, it's difficult. You're trying to keep positive, but there's more challenges than there've ever been, no matter what stage your company is at.
One last thing on both Chalkboard and Clapperboard, Mike. While you've been talking, it just, it occurred to me that when I was speaking with Jane Root in Edinburgh for last week's show, we were talking about what sector of the production business did she think that was probably most at risk, particularly within non-scripted. Was it the mega doc makers? Was it the ones in the middle? Or was it with the budget players or people that are used to producing at a low cost level? She said, the middle is what's going to really get squeezed, and the people that are working in the middle. I mean, looking at that, do you agree with that? And do you think that, you're probably going to say yes to this anyway, but the way that you've built your business model at a lower cost, higher value offering, do you think that will help insulate you from a lot of the pain that's going on in the industry right now?
I don't know, arguably. Maybe in scripted where it's more pronounced, that we set our stall out that we're kind of lower cost but high value, albeit we try to do that in a mid-tier as well. On non-scripted, we're not really known for that. We've done budget levels of all different types. So I don't think anyone's insulated from the downturn, to be honest. No matter what budget you're producing at, there's still challenges. We talked just now about budgets and overspends. You're as susceptible to that at a low tier as you are obviously at a higher tier, because there's no buffer, there's no protection. I've heard stories of companies paying to make TV shows. I think that's more common than people realize. Companies paying to make TV shows, yeah. but also where they've mortgaged up their net for the next few years. You can justify it to yourself and say, well, actually, I'll get net down the line, but that's not a guarantee. Net's never guaranteed. And so, even if you're in a lower tier of budget, you're still not insulated from it. I think a lot of producers have taken the view, and I understand this, to just keep producing and take the pain. I do agree with Jane that the mid-tier is most vulnerable in terms of where the commissions will come. But I think even at a lower tier, you're vulnerable because you just don't have that buffer. You're having to take more and more risks than you've ever taken before.
Do you subscribe to that then, that viewpoint that it's just important to keep producing, even if it's for no profit?
I can understand why people do it. They shouldn't have to do it, but I can understand it. I think MDs like me take the view it's important to be producing as a production company, because just like getting commissions can have a momentum, you can get a few. Not getting commissions can also have a momentum. You're going in and seeing commissioners, what are you working on? You want to be talking about shows that you're actually making, but it's a loss leader, isn't it? If you're not making any profit for any of the shows, then it's quickly going to bite you on the behind. So I understand why people do it. When we did the first dramas after Cold Call, we protected some kind of margin, but not a huge one. You could say, maybe that was a silly decision. Fortunately, in the short term, it's worked for us because they did sell. But if it hadn't, we'd have been in a really vulnerable place. So I understand and empathize with producers who do that. It's not the way it should be, but it is the way it is, I think, at the minute.
And now it's time for Story of the Week, where my guests get to nominate the TV industry news story that's caught their eye in the past 7 days or so. Mike, what's your Story of the Week?
So the one that caught my eye that really kind of resonated with me was the broadcaster opinion piece by Asha Talla on the nature and the terminology of talent in scripted, and how that can lead to unfairness and disparity within productions. I thought it was a really brave and interesting article. And I think at the heart of it, I mean, I've got it here. He says, I've long been against the phrase the talent, which has become shorthand for anyone up front on camera. It's actually offensive. Its very implication is that anyone else present isn't talent. This kind of really resonated with me. I think it's, partly going back to being from a non-scripted background, coming into scripted and the whole talent industry and credit industry and the different tiers within production. I don't think you get that to the same level in non-scripted, but you absolutely do in scripted. And I'm not just talking as well about on-screen talent. Really resonates this term talent and, what does it mean? And is it damaging? But also just about the categorizing your crew and your HODs, which it just seems to be a big thing in scripted. And it really was something that I wasn't across until I moved into it. And it's something that I kind of think about a lot. And I think Ash's argument is, does this term work? I mean, I think actually if you ask some people in front of camera who would term talent, they don't like the phrase as well, because by default, I think Ash is suggesting it means that the talent is only there for the select few, the ones with agents. That was an article I thought was really well written, really funny, and really resonated with me.
I'm not sure if it's behind a paywall or not, but I'll put a link in the episode description so you'll be able to go along and have a read of that. If it's not behind a paywall, that is, but we'll see. Now it's time for Hero of the Week, Mike, and get in the bin. Who or what are you, first of all, going to throw in the bin?
In the bin. Can I go a little bit random on this one? I was kind of, I knew I was chatting to you, Justin, and I thought, I just read the article about the guy who allegedly headbutted Roy Keane.
That's a news story that's breaking in the UK at the moment, and it's following the Manchester United and Arsenal match. This is Sky TV pundits. Roy Keane was apparently attacked following the match, and that's made headlines right across the UK at the moment.
I won't put the individual alleged to have done this in the bin because justice needs to run its course. And you might not like this, Justin, but I'd like to put Premier League football in the bin, if I may, because I kind of feel a little bit like it's where Premier League football is kind of a byproduct of that is this incident. I know you're a big Leeds fan, but kind of hear me out on it.
That's all right. We're not in the Premier League anymore. Mate,
okay. Well, you're safe.
As well.
Yeah, it's been interesting with the huge success and rise of women's football in terms of the media coverage. It shows you a purity that football had and could have, and it kind of shows where football, in my opinion, has lost its way. Sorry, I know I'm going off on a sport tangent, but I used to follow football. I follow rugby league more now, to be honest. But football used to be a game in the UK. It was local teams with local players playing for the team. Their wages weren't that different to the fans that kind of followed them. And then obviously, something big changed in the 90s. And I've got friends who are so passionate and evangelical about football that it's so blinkered, and they would, they're so strongly opinionated and they hate this team. And it just completely disconnects me to football. And also the idea that you can buy your way to victory. It might take a little bit longer than you thought, but you can essentially throw money at it. And, while other sports have things like salary caps, to kind of keep that level playing field, the Premier League don't have that. And so I read that article about Roy Keane. I know it's not too directly related, but it kind of is in the way in terms of, I just think it has a nasty energy around it a lot of the times, Premier League football. And as I say, that's why women's football was just so refreshing. It was about the game. It was about the fans. I've got two young daughters who were watching it with me and really excited. I'd have them watch a women's football game, not a Premier League football game. And so, yeah, slightly indirect, but that was the one that occurred to me.
I think it's hard to argue against any aspect of what you've just said. Money, I think many people would say money and TV money as one thing that's caused extraordinary amount of corruption within the Premier League. And now you're sort of starting to see actual countries investing in teams where money is no object, I still can't understand how this financial play works. It just seems to me that there's a level playing field doesn't exist anymore. And you're right. And I think that does compromise the fairness of the game. So Premier League football is going in the bin, and women's football and the opportunity that has to retain a bit of purity, then we're all for that. And how about your hero of the week?
It's probably maybe a couple of weeks too late, but I wanted to suggest a fellow Northerner, sadly recently deceased, but Michael Parkinson is my hero of the week. In the wake of his passing, I revisited, some of the BBC documentaries about him and went down various YouTube rabbit warrens looking at his interviews, and I was really affected by his passing. It's kind of a level of nostalgia for a kind of genre of TV show that doesn't exist anymore. The kind of chat show that he did that came from a journalistic point of view rather than just a comedic. I've always been sad that doesn't seem to exist in the same way in the TV landscape. You have fantastic comedy-leaning chat shows, but they seem to be devised around a punchline. It seems to be comedic leaning, whereas Parkinson, it wasn't that way. He interviewed some absolutely fascinating people in a way that wasn't driven by comedy alone, although he had some fantastic comedic interviews with Peter Kay and Billy Connolly, but, some really intriguing journalistic interviews. And I think TV is poorer for not having that type of interviewer on. I know they've tried it at various points, but and arguably it's been replaced by what we're on now, the podcast. You get that long form interview. But Parkinson on its day, and even things like Wogan that I know was a little bit lighter, it was a journalistic interview where you really got into the weeds of what this person was all about and their story. And I don't think that exists in the same way anymore. So his passing affected me, but also kind of made me think a little bit about why this doesn't exist. And it's a shame. It
brings us back to a point that you made earlier about talent. Do you think that an interviewee is much more protected by agents and overzealous PRs from LA now that wouldn't subject their client to a properly rigorous interview? I agree that one of the things that struck me about Parkinson is the research that he'd done and was brilliant. And some of his interviews were kind of car crashes, right? The Meg Ryan one was a famous example of that. I think you're right. I mean, the interview shows the poorer for that. I mean, do you think that it would ever make a comeback, or do you think that maybe? Do you think that's the reason for it? Do you agree with my rationale that it's the PRs and the agents that are protecting the talent?
Yeah, it potentially is that. Although you do see kind of quite in-depth interviews on other mediums, but maybe it's not as exposing as kind of primetime television. So maybe that is part of it. I think we've pitched stuff in this space and always got a rejection. I think when they've tried it throughout the years, something a little bit less comedic, I'm not sure that they've necessarily picked the right person to do it, because the thing about Parkinson is he was from a journalistic background, and that gave him, I think, a level of research and intrigue that's slightly different to someone from more of an NSAT background. And so, but I think the shows that haven't quite worked have been set as proof for why this type of show doesn't work anymore. I still think there's an appetite for it, especially, you've got an aging overnights audience, but the overnights are still really important, who have a yearning, I think, for this type of show and this type of in-depth interview. And it's not really being served. And you'd have to ask the question, well, who is doing it? Who is hosting it? But I think there's a real appetite for it. You want to get into their stories, their life stories. They're absolutely fascinating people. I mean, Parkinson had James Cagney, Fred Astaire, Bette Midler, Ali, some of the most iconic interviews. I think it's a shame. Maybe, TV's cyclical. Maybe it'll come back around. But certainly it's been a good few years since we've had something like Parkinson.
Yeah, well, I'd hope so. I guess that a parallel you could draw would be Andrew Neil, in the way that his interviewing style and the research and the rigor that there's a whole team who are working with him. I mean, it's slightly different because obviously they're getting politicians on the spike. Some agree to go on and some don't. But those interviews are absolute masterclasses in knowing what a politician is going to say to a particular answer, and, not giving them any easy way out, not giving them the opportunity to hang themselves on the words. But yeah, that journalistic rigor absolutely does make for fascinating viewing. Well, maybe Chalkboard will be the one to bring back the proper primetime interview.
Sounds good. You can host it, Justin.
There we
I
go.
trust you. I trust you.
Hey, listen, I'll be the tomorrow's Parkinson any day. You know, I think the only thing I've got in common with him is coming from Yorkshire, to be honest. But there we go, Mike. Listen, it's been fantastic chatting with you. Really enjoyed our discussion. Thanks so much for coming on to TellyCast this week, and I wish you all the very best with all your shows that are coming up. There's obviously lots of them. All the best with them all. I will see you around, probably on the streets of Soho, having a drink at some point over the next few weeks.
I look forward to that. Thank you, Justin. Thank you for having me. And congratulations as well on all the success of the podcast. I think it's fantastic, and it does something unique in the industry. So congratulations on that.
Thanks, Mike.
Cheers, Justin. Bye.
Well, we've reached the end of this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. We'll be back, same time, same place next week. Until then, stay safe.